Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the video on narrowing down your research questions and talking a little bit about methods. So this is in preparation for the pilot study and qualifying exam 2 course. So the first thing you need to do, you've already watched a video and done some work where you've brainstormed some research questions. So you should have somewhere between 5 and 10 research questions. You've done some iteration. You've thought about the different components of a question, which are listed here on this slide, right? The actual question words, in this case, how can, the context, in this case, a Hispanic serving institution, the participants, in this case, Latino students, what you're interested in. Here we have the example of increasing retention among Latino students and the mechanism, if you have a mechanism you're interested in, which in this case was integrating academic and student programs. However, so a student might have brainstormed this question, it fits all the boxes, but if you look at it more closely, you can see that this question is not feasible in a 3-month, 4-month data collection process for a dissertation, because of this one piece about retention, right? The rest of it is interesting, right? You want to research academic programs, you're interested in Latino students, but you can't research retention in a 3 or 4 month process of data collection. That said, you can keep studying this after your dissertation. Your dissertation is only the start, so you could keep going, but for now, for the pilot study and dissertation, this student would need to do some thinking about maybe how might it increase student sense of engagement, like in a more temporary way, or even possibly student grades might be possible, not during the pilot study, but for the dissertation. Another issue with research questions can be that they are too general. So an example of a research question that's too general is here. What is the relationship between teacher change and professional development? So you would ask, what kind of teacher change? Change in confidence, change in self-efficacy, change in knowledge, change in instructional practice, in what area? So a question written like this would need to be made more specific. So you have any questions that are written in this way, think about areas where you can add specificity. Other ways to evaluate your questions. So, of course, one of the key things is, does the question account for an issue of importance in terms of social justice? So long ago, I had a student not in this program who was really interested in the struggles of French speakers in US schools. And I was very concerned that here in the United States, that is not generally, depending on the place, but usually, at least in California, an issue of social justice. Another question we can ask is, what would be appropriate evidence for answering the question? And do I have access to this evidence? An example here is we had a student who was a university administrator, and she was interested in researching high school ethnic studies courses. We supported her because she was very passionate and committed to study this, but she had a huge amount of difficulty collecting data. So I would really encourage you to think about your context you're already in, think about who you already know in terms of spaces and places to do your research. And finally, how much evidence would be necessary to answer the particular research question? And as I'm going through these, of course, look at your research questions and think about them. You know, like maybe you're crossing some off the list, or maybe you're saying, oh, I'm going to tweak a few things. So the negative example for this one is, what are the experiences of Latino students across the UC system? Okay, so aside from being too general, right, this becomes a problem for not being specific enough. This also would require getting too much evidence for, again, completing a dissertation in 1 year. So thinking like you would have to somehow survey Latino students across every single UC, right, in order to answer this research question. And that would be very, very difficult to do. So sometimes bounding the case is useful, having only one or two cases, or maybe maybe there's other ways to bound it. Maybe you could find one student at each university, but this seems like it's probably a little bit too much. So here's a couple of examples of research questions that are feasible and specific, and also fit all of the things described in the last slide. So this is my student, Heather. She did her dissertation with me a little while back, and she asks, in what ways does the relationship between site administration and special education teachers influence retention of students with disabilities in a charter high school setting? So you can see how specific this is, right? She's interested in this relationship. She labels the setting, right? She understands exactly where each of these pieces lies. Now, the one potential issue, again, is this word retention. So she would need to make sure that she is able to answer that with her evidence. Another research question, this was for a pilot study, is my student Zainab from a few years ago. Post 9/11, in what ways have Muslim youth resisted the stereotype prevalent in the media? So again, pretty specific in terms of timing, in terms of students. The one piece of advice I might give her is to not just have the term resisted. I mean, you could look at just how they're resisting, but to be more open to their experience might be how have they encountered, interpreted, and acted towards these stereotypes, right? So opening that up just a little bit, because some students might not have resisted, right? And so depends, maybe you only want to see ways in which they've resisted and you would just throw out data from a student that hasn't resisted. But so again, thinking about your wording here. Okay, so you should have by now, like we've talked through some research questions, I'm hoping you have, as you look through your questions, maybe one or two that you're like, okay, this fits all these things. It's feasible, it's specific, it addresses a social justice issue. I can get the evidence. So you're really feeling good about one or two or three research questions. Now I want you to think about your methods. And I know you have been thinking about this all along. You've been taking methods courses, you've been, really thinking about it. And also, of course, some research questions are more well suited for certain methods. So we, in the pilot study course, we are going to have 4 reading groups. And these methods correspond to those reading groups. Now, you might have a method that's slightly outside that, but we'll figure out a way for you to fit in. And I'm going to talk about these 4 main supported areas of research in the pilot study course. So first off is mixed methods. Mixed methods research uses both quantitative and qualitative data. Usually the quantitative data is surveys, and usually the qualitative data is interviews. Often the participants are one large sample for the survey and one smaller sample for the interviews. Often the interview sample is from the same group. It's a subsample of the survey group. Mixed methods are great for evaluations of programs. They're great if you want a broad sense of what's going on, as well as a couple of understanding of like deeper experiences of folks on the ground. Interview methods is one type of data. You just do interviews of people. Usually it is a cross section of the same type of people across several different institutions. So for example, a study of the experiences of Black principals, right? So that person would be interviewing Black principals across a number of schools. Another type of interview study might be looking at the experiences of certain kinds of teachers. It might be looking at the experiences of youth. Let's see, another student had was interested in the experiences of Black athletes across institutions. So it's the same type across institutions. So it's trying to understand the perceptions of and experiences of people across different contexts. The next area is actually, there's two that sort of fit in pretty well here, and that is case study and action research. Okay, these differ a little bit, but they tend to kind of collect the same kinds of data, all right? And you can also do evaluation this way. So in a case study, there is a boundary. So you are studying a school, a program, a district. And you collect multiple kinds of data about that situation, or sometimes it's a class. That can be a case study too. So you might do a survey, you might do, and you don't have to, of course, you can do a couple of interviews, you can do some observations. So a lot of times people combine interviews and observations, like maybe they're interested in looking at what's going on in a class. They would interview the teacher or some students they might observe in the class. That's a case study. You would be looking at people and events at different levels. So you want to, when you're doing a case study, like of a class or a school, you want to get perspectives from, different aspects of that case. In action research, it's very similar, except it's kind of ongoing and iterative. So in action research, you're asking questions like, okay, can we make a difference in how we do things? And then you try to make a change. You gather a little bit of data about the change you're making, and then you try out a new change. These things are good for evaluations. So evaluating a program, a class, anything like that. They're good for studying reforms you are implementing. Action research is a great way to study a reform that you would like to try out. And since I know you are all doing amazing work, you could do something like that. And they're also good for understanding different bounded entities as a system. So if you really are interested in researching and understanding systems, case study is a good way to do it. Okay, that's it for the start of class. Just try to hammer out a methods paragraph or even a series of bullet points. So what kind of methods are you thinking of doing? Why do you want to do it that way? Kind of what kind of data are you hoping to gather? Those kinds of things so that I can talk to you about it. I'm going to sign off, and I will see you all fairly soon.